As I hauled myself from the pool's grip, water slithered down my flesh in languid, gleaming rivulets, each bead snaring the dying afternoon light in a frantic shimmer of hues before melting into the inky, drenched weave of my swimsuit. The air loomed dense, a suffocating shroud of summer's fury, clawing at my throat, forcing every gasp to feel like a stolen act, every sigh a calculated surrender. The sun blazed overhead, a merciless tyrant, its beams slashing through the naked sky to carve brutal, fractured shadows across the chipped tiles encircling the pool. The pavement scorched my bare soles, a fleeting bite I acknowledged but shoved aside. My swimsuit gripped me, chilled and heavy with secrets, a jarring counterpoint to the arid, blistering haze of the day, yet it barely pierced my awareness. The heat, the unease, the pool's whispered churn at my back. My mind was snagged elsewhere, tethered to him, a pull I couldn't sever, as if some unseen thread had already begun to unravel something dangerous. James sat on the terrace a few yards away, settled in a cushioned wicker chair that groaned faintly under his weight. A book lay open in his lap, its pages splayed beneath his strong hands, the spine creased from where the cover faded, the title too blurry to read from where I stood. It didn't matter. He wasn't reading. His eyes didn't sweep across the lines of text, didn't follow the words he pretended to take in. They were on me, a quiet, steady pressure I felt even before I turned to face him fully. The terrace rose just above the pool, giving him a clear vantage point, and there he sat, still, composed, a dark shape against the bright sky, watching. It started subtly, his gaze a quick, passing flick that could have been unintentional, the kind anyone might toss toward a sudden motion in their periphery. Water dripped from my hair, pooling at my feet, and I shifted my stance, feeling the slick tiles beneath me. That's when it changed. His look stretched, lingering beyond a casual glance into something deliberate, an extra beat, a moment too long to brush off his chance. I caught it, sharp and vivid, the way his deep brown eyes fixed on me, intense and unwavering, cutting through the space between us. Then, just as fast, he ripped them away, snapping his attention back to the book with an almost tangible force. His fingers tightened around the paperback, knuckles paling briefly against his tan skin, the pages buckling slightly under the strain. His jaw clenched, a faint ripple of muscle beneath the light stubble shadowing his face, before he forced himself to relax, sinking back into the charade of reading. But it was too late. I'd seen it. It wasn't the look of a stepfather proud of his stepdaughter's poise after a swim, not the warm, familiar glance I'd grown accustomed to over the years. It was something else, something heavier, something that charged the air with an unspoken tension I couldn't ignore. James was 45, my mother's husband for the last 3 years, a man who seemed chiseled from stone, unbending, disciplined, a pillar of absolute control. He was tall, broad-shouldered, with a presence that dominated any space he entered, whether it was our cozy kitchen or the polished boardrooms where he spent his days. He never raised his voice, never let his temper slip, never allowed a single flaw to crack the smooth veneer of his composure. His dark hair bore the first threads of gray at the temples, a subtle mark of age that only sharpened his authority, lending him a distinguished air. He moved with purpose, every step and gesture precise, as if he'd charted the world and refused to let it catch him off guard. I'd watched him close $1-million deals over the phone, his voice calm and smooth as marble, not a hint of strain as he dismantled arguments and bent powerful men to his will. He was a fortress, impenetrable, unshakable, a man who thrived on structure and wielded power like it was instinct. And yet, in that brief moment by the pool, I glimpsed something I'd never seen before, a hesitation, a flicker of doubt, a shadow of vulnerability in a man who was never anything less than certain. I stood there, water still trickling from my hair, dripping onto the tiles in soft, rhythmic plops, and let the moment sink in. I could have walked away right then, turned my back on that look and let it melt into the hazy heat of the day. That would have been the wise choice, the safe one, the path that kept everything neat and unchanged. I could have grabbed my towel, slung over the arm of a nearby lounge chair, and wrapped it tightly around my dripping frame, shielding myself from the sun and from him. I could have slipped back into the cool, air-conditioned haven of the house, the sliding glass doors just steps away, and let the moment evaporate like the water drying on my skin. It would have been simple to pretend I hadn't noticed, to blame it on a trick of the light or my own imagination running wild after too long in the sun. But I didn't want to. Something stirred in me, a restless curiosity, a spark of defiance, a thrill that buzzed beneath my skin like static. I wanted to know what that hesitation meant, how deep it went, How much it would take to turn that flicker into a fissure, to see what lay beneath the surface of the man I thought I knew. "Hot day, huh?" I said, my voice light and breezy, as if I were tossing out a casual comment about the weather to break the silence. I kept it easy, playful even, but inside, my pulse raced, a quick thudding in my chest that echoed in my ears and made my fingers tremble faintly. James didn't look up from his book, his eyes locked on the page he wasn't reading, his posture unchanged, legs crossed, one hand resting lightly on the arm of the chair. "Yeah," he replied, the word short and flat, clipped at the edges. But I caught the faintest strain in it, a thread of tension he couldn't quite bury beneath his usual calm. I reached for my towel, the soft terry cloth brushing my fingertips as I lifted it from the chair, warm from the sun. Normally, I'd have wrapped it around myself without a thought, covering the wet cling of my swimsuit. But this time, I didn't. Instead, I let it dangle loosely in my hands, hanging at my side like an afterthought. The sun was merciless, its heat sinking into my skin, drying me fast. Each slow droplet traced a deliberate path down my collarbone, over the curve of my stomach, vanishing into the waistband of my swimsuit with a faint, cool tickle. I stood there, letting the heat and the silence stretch between us, feeling the weight of his presence even though he refused to meet my gaze. "You look tense," I said, tilting my head slightly, my tone still casual but edged with something sharper, a question, a nudge. His fingers tightened around the book, the pages crinkling faintly under the pressure, the sound barely audible but unmistakable in the stillness. "Just a lot on my mind," he said, his voice steady but distant, like he'd rehearsed the line and pulled it out as a shield. His eyes stayed on the book, but I could see the effort it took, the way his shoulders stiffened just a fraction, the way his breathing grew shallower. I smiled, a small, knowing curve of my lips I couldn't hold back, a flicker of triumph sparking in my chest. He was uncomfortable, and I could sense it in every line of his body, every forced breath he took. Good. How long could he keep that mask in place? How long before it slipped, before I saw what he was trying so hard to hide? Dinner that night should have been normal, just another quiet evening around the table with my mother and James, the kind of routine we'd settled into over the years. The dining room was softly lit, the chandelier overhead casting a warm glow over the polished wood table. My mother sat across from me, her fork twirling strands of pasta as she launched into an animated story about some new project at work. Her hands danced through the air, punctuating her words with quick, enthusiastic gestures, her voice bright with excitement as she described meetings with clients, deadlines she'd crushed, and a promotion she was chasing. Her blonde hair was pulled back in a loose bun, a few strands escaping to frame her face, and her eyes sparkled with the energy she always brought to these conversations. James sat at the head of the table, listening attentively, nodding at all the right moments. His posture was relaxed, shoulders loose, one hand resting casually on the edge of his plate, the other holding a glass of red wine he hadn't touched. To anyone else, to my mother, to a stranger peering through the window, it would have looked like a perfectly ordinary family dinner, the kind that unfolds every night in homes everywhere. The clink of silverware against plates, the hum of the ceiling fan overhead, the faint scent of garlic and basil lingering in the air, it was all so familiar, so mundane. But I knew better. He hadn't looked at me once since we'd sat down, not even a glance in my direction, and that avoidance spoke louder than any words he could have said. His eyes stayed fixed on my mother, following her gestures, or drifted to his plate, studying the food he barely ate. It wasn't an accident, that refusal to meet my gaze, it was deliberate, a wall he'd built with careful precision, and it told me everything I needed to know. I decided to test it, to push just a little and see how he'd hold up under the pressure. I leaned forward slowly, reaching for my glass of water, my movements deliberate and unhurried. The tablecloth brushed against my arm, soft and cool, and I let my fingers graze the rim of the glass, tracing its edge with a casual ease that hid the tension coiling in my stomach. I watched him from the corner of my eye, waiting for a reaction, a flinch, a shift, anything. Nothing. His gaze stayed locked on my mother, his expression smooth and unchanged, his hand steady around his wine glass. I shifted in my seat, crossing my legs under the table, letting my bare knee brush lightly against his, against fabric, a fleeting touch that could have been accidental. Still nothing. No flicker in his eyes, no tightening of his jaw, just the same steady silence he'd maintained since we'd sat down. But that silence was louder than any reaction would have been. It was too perfect, too controlled, too deliberate, a performance that betrayed him more than a shout ever could. Normal men don't work this hard to act normal. They don't build walls that high, that solid, unless there's something they're desperate to keep hidden behind them, something they're afraid of letting slip. I almost laughed, the sound rising in my throat like a bubble before I swallowed it back down, pressing my lips together to keep it inside. This was going to be fun, a game I hadn't meant to start, hadn't even known I wanted to play until that moment by the pool. But now that I was in it, I couldn't resist seeing how far it would go. That night, I lay awake in bed, staring up at the ceiling as moonlight filtered through the half-open blinds, casting thin silver stripes across the walls of my room. The house was quiet, the only sound the low, steady hum of the air conditioning cycling on and off, a faint drone that blended into the stillness. My sheets were cool against my skin, the fabric slightly damp from the lingering humidity that even the AC couldn't fully banish. I should have been tired, exhausted, really, after a day spent in the sun, the chlorine still faintly clinging to my hair, a subtle reminder of the pool. But my mind refused to settle, buzzing with a restless energy that kept sleep at bay. It kept circling back to that moment by the pool, replaying the way James's control had faltered, the way his eyes had lingered on me just a fraction too long before he'd yanked them away. Over and over, I saw it, the tension in his fingers as they gripped the book, the clench of his jaw, the quick, forced return to his pretense of reading. Was I imagining it? Had I conjured something out of nothing, projecting my own boredom, my own need for something to break the monotony of this endless summer, onto him? No. I knew what I'd seen. I knew what it meant. And I knew this was only the beginning. The clock on my nightstand glowed a soft red, 11:47 p.m. The numbers ticked forward silently, each minute stretching longer than the last. My mother would be asleep by now, tucked into the king-sized bed she shared with James, her breathing deep and even, oblivious to the currents shifting beneath the surface of our little family. I pictured her there, her blonde hair fanned across the pillow, one arm flung carelessly over the edge of the mattress, lost in dreams of work deadlines and client meetings. And James, what was he doing? Was he lying beside her, staring at the ceiling like I was, wrestling with whatever had flickered in his eyes earlier? Or had he already dismissed it, buried it deep beneath the iron discipline of his will, convincing himself it was nothing? I didn't think so. That look hadn't been nothing. It had been a crack, a glimpse of something raw and unguarded, and I couldn't stop thinking about what might happen if I pressed on it, if I pushed until it widened. The silence deepened, thickening into the kind that only comes when the rest of the world is lost in sleep. It wrapped around me, heavy and absolute, broken only by the occasional creak of the house settling, the faint groan of wood expanding in the night's heat. I shifted under the sheets, turning onto my side, then my back again, restless. My bare legs brushed against the fabric, the sensation grounding me for a moment, but it wasn't enough to quiet my thoughts. I should have stayed still, closed my eyes, forced myself to drift off. That's what a sensible person would do, let the day end, let the strange, electric hum of that moment by the pool fade into memory. But I wasn't sensible. Not tonight. Something pulled at me, a thread of curiosity laced with something darker, something I didn't want to name. I wanted to know more. I wanted to see him again, to catch him off guard, to test how far that crack could stretch before it broke open entirely. I slipped out of bed, my bare feet pressing silently against the cold hardwood floor. The chill shot up my legs, a sharp contrast to the warmth of my skin, and I shivered, pausing for a moment by the edge of the mattress. My tank top hung loose over my shorts, the hem brushing my thighs as I moved. I didn't bother with a robe or slippers, there was no need. The house was mine in this quiet hour, a space I could navigate with my eyes closed. I stepped toward the door, my hand resting on the knob, and hesitated. What was I doing? I didn't have a plan, not really, just an impulse, a need to move, to chase that spark I'd felt earlier. Maybe I'd go downstairs for a glass of water. Maybe I'd just wander the halls, letting the shadows swallow me until my mind finally tired itself out. Or maybe, I'd find him. The hallway was dark, the faint glow of a nightlight in the bathroom casting a soft pool of yellow at the far end. I moved quietly, my feet silent against the floorboards, each step deliberate and slow. The air felt cooler here, unstirred by the sun's earlier heat, and it brushed against my arms, raising faint goosebumps. The stairs loomed ahead, a black silhouette against the dimness, and I descended, one step at a time, my hand trailing along the smooth banister for balance. The wood was cool under my fingers, polished and familiar, a tether to the reality of the house around me. But my heartbeat quickened with every step, a steady rhythm that pulsed in my ears, louder now than the silence I'd left behind. I didn't know why I was doing this, why I felt compelled to leave the safety of my room and drift into the unknown. Maybe I was testing a theory. Maybe I just wanted to see what would happen if I pushed a little further, if I stepped closer to that edge I'd glimpsed earlier. At the bottom of the stairs, a faint glow spilled from the kitchen doorway, cutting through the darkness like a beacon. It wasn't bright, just the soft, warm light of the under-cabinet fixtures, left on by habit or oversight. Someone was awake. I paused, my breath catching in my throat, and listened. The house was still, but not empty. I could feel it, that subtle shift in the air that comes when another presence occupies the same space. My bare toes curled against the tile of the foyer, cold and unyielding, and I took a step forward, then another, drawn toward that light like a moth to a flame. I didn't call out, didn't announce myself. I wanted to see before I was seen, to catch him, if it was him, in a moment of unguarded truth. I reached the doorway and stopped, hovering just outside the threshold, my body half hidden by the wall. James stood by the counter, alone, his broad frame outlined against the dim glow. He was pouring amber liquid into a heavy glass tumbler, whiskey, probably, judging by the bottle on the counter, its label catching the light. He wore a plain t-shirt and sweatpants, casual in a way that felt out of place for a man who usually carried himself like he was stepping into a boardroom. His shoulders were stiff, the muscles taut beneath the fabric, and his jaw was set, a hard line that betrayed the tension he couldn't shake. He exhaled slowly, a long, measured breath that seemed to carry the weight of something unspoken, and rubbed a hand over his face, fingers lingering against his brow as if he could press away whatever was gnawing at him. For the first time, he looked unsettled, vulnerable, almost human in a way I wasn't used to seeing. The man who commanded million-dollar deals, who never flinched under pressure, was fraying at the edges, and I couldn't look away. I stepped forward, just enough for the floor to creak faintly under my weight, just enough for him to notice. "Can't sleep?" My voice was soft, barely above a whisper, but it sliced through the stillness like a blade, sharp and deliberate. James stiffened instantly, the muscles in his back locking tight beneath his shirt. He turned slowly, his movements controlled but heavy, as if every inch cost him effort. His eyes flicked to mine for a fraction of a second, dark, unreadable, before darting away, settling on the counter instead. "You should be in bed," he muttered, lifting the glass to his lips and taking a slow sip. The ice clinked faintly against the sides, a small, sharp sound in the quiet. I didn't move, my voice hanging in the air between us. "So should you," I said, stepping closer, the tile cold against my feet. James's jaw tightened, his fingers gripping the glass harder. "Eva, go back upstairs," he said, his tone sharp, no warmth left. I tilted my head, watching him. "You don't seem fine." He exhaled, a shaky breath, and turned away, setting the glass down with a clink. "I'm fine," he lied. But I pressed on. "Since the pool, you've been off. Did I do something?" His shoulders stiffened, and I knew I'd hit the mark. Silence stretched, thick and charged, until he faced me again, eyes dark with something unspoken. "You need to stop," he warned, voice low. But I didn't. I stepped closer, close enough to feel the heat radiating from him. "Stop what?" I asked, soft but daring. His hand twitched, then shot out, grabbing my wrist, not hard, but firm. "This," he said, his grip trembling with restraint. My pulse raced, but I didn't pull away. "If you don't leave now, I won't stop," he said, a raw edge to his words. I met his gaze, unflinching. "Then don't." The air snapped. His control broke, and he pulled me in, lips crashing against mine, desperate, forbidden. It was chaos, heat, everything we shouldn't have been. Then the front door clicked open. We froze. My mother stood there, bag slipping from her hand, eyes wide with silent horror. No words, just a look that shattered everything. James stepped back, hands shaking, and grabbed his keys. "I'm sorry," he muttered, then left. She turned to me, face unreadable. "Get out," she said, calm and final. I'd won the game but lost it all, alone in the wreckage I'd made. The air in the kitchen hung heavy, thick with the scent of whiskey and the unspoken weight of what had just happened. My mother's silhouette stood rigid in the doorway, the faint glow from the foyer casting her shadow long and sharp across the tile floor. Her bag lay crumpled at her feet, abandoned, its contents spilling out, a lipstick, a set of keys, a crumpled receipt, small, mundane pieces of her life now scattered like evidence of the moment everything broke. Her eyes, wide and unblinking, locked onto mine, and in them, I saw not just shock, not just betrayal, but something deeper, a quiet, searing pain that cut through the silence louder than any scream could have. She didn't speak at first, and neither did I. The space between us stretched taut, a thread pulled to its breaking point, vibrating with the tension of what we both knew but couldn't yet name. James's footsteps had already faded, the jangle of his keys swallowed by the night as he fled through the front door. The sound of his car engine roared to life outside, a low growl that receded into the distance, leaving behind an emptiness that pressed against my chest. He was gone, his apology, a muttered "I'm sorry," hanging in the air like smoke, dissipating but leaving a bitter sting. I'd pushed him to that edge, watched his control fracture, felt the heat of his lips against mine in a moment that was as exhilarating as it was wrong. And now, here I stood, the architect of this chaos, facing the wreckage I'd wrought. My mother took a step forward, her heels clicking sharply against the tile, the sound deliberate, final. Her face was a mask calm, too calm, the kind of stillness that comes before a storm shatters everything in its path. "Get out," she said, her voice low and steady, each word carved from ice. There was no tremble, no hesitation, just a cold certainty that left no room for argument. Her gaze didn't waver, pinning me in place, and for the first time, I saw her not as my mother, not as the woman who laughed over pasta at dinner or rambled about her work with bright-eyed enthusiasm, but as a stranger, someone I'd hurt in a way I couldn't undo. I opened my mouth to speak, to explain, to apologize, but the words lodged in my throat, heavy and useless. What could I say? That it was a game? That I hadn't meant for it to go this far? That I'd only wanted to see how much pressure it took to crack the uncrackable? To peel back the layers of the man she'd married and find something real beneath? None of it would matter. The truth was, I'd known what I was doing. Every step, every word, every glance by the pool and beyond, I'd chosen it, chased it, reveled in the thrill of it. And now the cost was staring me in the face, unblinking and unforgiving. "Ava," she said, my name a quiet command, a warning. "Go. Now." I nodded, a small, jerky motion, and turned toward the stairs. My bare feet felt the cold bite of the tile, grounding me in the reality of what was happening. I climbed the steps slowly, each one a weight pulling me further from the life I'd known, the life I'd just torched with my own hands. In my room, the moonlight still sliced through the blinds, painting the walls in silver streaks, but it felt different now, hollow, like a stage abandoned after the play had ended. I grabbed a duffel bag from my closet, stuffing it with whatever my hands found: clothes, a phone charger, a pair of sneakers, movements mechanical, detached. My tank top and shorts clung to me, still faintly damp from the humidity, a reminder of the pool, of the moment this all began. Downstairs, I heard the faint clink of glass, my mother pouring herself a drink, maybe, or cleaning up the mess James had left behind. I didn't look back as I slipped out the front door, the night air hitting me like a slap, warm and sticky against my skin. The street was quiet, the houses dark, their windows blind to the drama unfolding in ours. I walked, bag slung over my shoulder, the pavement rough beneath my feet, and let the silence swallow me. I didn't know where I was going. A friend's house, maybe, or a cheap motel if I could scrape together the cash. It didn't matter. What mattered was the realization sinking in, slow and relentless, like water seeping into cracked earth. I'd won the game, I'd pushed James past his limits, seen the mask slip, felt the raw, forbidden rush of his breaking point. But the victory was ash in my mouth, bitter and empty. I'd lost everything else, my mother's trust, my home, the fragile balance we'd built over years. And James? He was gone, a shadow retreating into the night, leaving me to face the fallout alone. The stars above were faint, dulled by the city's glow, and I stopped at the edge of the street, staring up at them. My chest ached, a hollow pang that wasn't regret, not exactly, but something closer to recognition. I'd wanted to feel alive, to break the monotony, to test the boundaries of power and control. And I had. But the thrill had burned out fast, leaving only this, me, standing in the dark, with nothing but a bag and the weight of my choices. Maybe one day I'd see my mother again, find a way to bridge the chasm I'd carved between us. Maybe James would come back, and we'd all pretend this night never happened. Or maybe this was it, the end of the story I'd written in reckless, selfish strokes. For now, I turned and kept walking, the sound of my footsteps the only thing left to fill the silence.